So talk about the importance of exercise when it comes to longevity, why it's one of the most important pieces, not only in this challenge, but you've talked about it extensively on your podcast as well. And then we can get into kind of the protocol for maximizing longevity.
There are various forms of exercise. So let's just talk high level, just say exercise, and we can double click on different types. But exercise is an incredible way to improve the quality of your skeletal muscle, which is very important as we age for maintaining physical function, preventing frailty and falls. And falls lead to increased risk of fracture. Exercise is amazing for increasing bone mineral density. One of the parts of this challenge is getting people to do a DEXA scan. And I can't even tell you the number of people last year, particularly postmenopausal women, who for the first time in their life discovered that they have osteopenia or osteoporosis. The first step often to beginning exercise for people is becoming aware of something like that. That can be very motivating. So exercise is incredible for building bone mineral density. And we can get into the specifics of what that looks like. Metabolic health. Exercise has been shown to be effective in reducing ectopic or visceral fat. So fat that is within organs like the liver and the pancreas, which really predisposes, is kind of ground zero for developing fatty liver, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes. Exercise actually has, not inconsequential, it has some relatively modest effect on blood lipids. So not as much as nutrition. And, usually when we're talking about cholesterol and ApoB, it's all about nutrition, but exercise actually will help lower ApoB a little bit. And it's clearly associated with lower risk of dementia, lower risk of all of these metabolic conditions, lower risk of obesity, which it predisposes to many, many forms of cancer. And I agree with you. I think it's perhaps the biggest lever that we can pull when it comes to our health. And if you take, we just spent 30 minutes talking about protein. There are studies looking at if you increase protein in two different contexts. So you take a group of people and you increase protein up to 1.5 grams per kilogram, pretty high intake. In one context, they're doing resistance training. In the other context, they're not doing resistance training. And you're looking at changes in strength, right? And strength is a very big predictor of premature death, total mortality, grip strength in particular, kind of a global marker. If you just feed people protein and you don't have the stimulus there, what do you think happens? There's no increase in strength. If there is, it's very tiny. And it's not until you add in that resistance training that you start to see very large increases in strength when you go from like 0.8 grams per kilo, low protein intake, to a 1.5 gram per kilogram intake. And I think the latest stats show like nearly 80% of adults in America are not meeting the resistance training recommendations, which is about 2 hours a week of resistance training. So if you want an exercise program that is improving the health of your bones, improving the health of your skeletal muscle, improving the health of your heart, your arteries, these important metabolic organs like liver, improving brain health, the effects on the brain, we could have a whole episode dedicated to that. Improving mood, improving learning. So if you exercise, your ability to recall information in the hours after that is higher. There are, often we can end up focusing on all the long-term chronic effects of exercise, but there are acute benefits up for grabs as well, particularly on mood and cognition. But an exercise plan that's kind of addressing all of those factors that are really important to high quality of life would include resistance training at least a couple times a week. That is sort of full body across a week. Some moderate intensity cardiovascular training, and that is moderate intensity at a high level definition would be where you're sort of working out at an intensity where your heart rate is sort of 60 to 80% of your maximum heart rate. Then, in the ballpark of at least, I think, 16 minutes of high intensity exercise per week, which is you're at that intensity is what someone may describe as zone 4-5. That's getting your heart rate up to kind of 80 to 95% of your max heart rate, where it's really challenging and it feels like your heart's sort of beating out of your chest. But that is a very simple template. Couple of resistance training, sessions a week. They're about 45 minutes to an hour, 150 minutes of moderate intensity cardiovascular training, and getting 16 minutes of this high intensity work in is going to optimize all of those different systems and be a great program for longevity. Now, that's speaking at a population level, Doug. Sometimes when you get down to an individual, I started my career as a physiotherapist. You're working with someone who has osteopenia, osteoporosis. And then now I'm thinking, okay, higher risk of falls, need to modify some exercise with that in mind, and maybe need to work on more proprioception balance work. So within the resistance training for that particular person, we might have more focus on single leg exercises and doing things that are kind of challenging that person's balance and stability a little bit more. So of course there's individualization and customization, but high level, I think that's a good starting point for exercise.
And then is there any research to show a specific form of exercise or type of exercise that can actually add years or even a decade to somebody's life? I would imagine indirectly, if you're somebody who doesn't do cardiovascular training, you have high blood pressure and you have high cholesterol and your heart health is poor, then doing cardiovascular exercise is going to, I'm sure it's going to add years to your life. And the same thing with resistance training. I know when you and Lane were on the show together, talked about, I know this has been something that's been kind of controversial on social media, that I think it's above the age of 60 or something. If you fall, maybe that's the number one, you're more likely to die within the first year or something after a fall. I don't know, you could correct me on that, but it was something to that extent. So I'm also imagining that resistance training, if you do it properly, it's going to add years to your life as well. So I'd love for you to kind of extrapolate that and hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So falls are a big issue in terms of if you're over the age of 65 and you have a fracture, say of the femoral head, there is a very high chance of mortality in the first 2 years following that fracture. Where this was misrepresented online, and it was something that I actually dedicated a video to, was there were a few doctors, very prominent doctors, I'm not going to name them, because they actually put their hand up and said, yeah, I made an error, which I think is great. But by then the horse had bolted, had come out and said that, over the age of 65, fractures are the leading cause of death, which is not true. Over the age of 65, leading cause of death is cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer, etc. That doesn't change. What is true is that over the age of 65, if you look at deaths from accidents, which only makes up about 4% of deaths overall, that falls the highest cause of accidental death within that category. So in the context, it makes up a very small amount of overall deaths for people over 65. But it is true, if you have a fracture, your individual risk of mortality does go up. It's just not accurate to say that's accounting for the majority of the deaths over 65 in a country like America. That said, I think we should be educating people certainly about things that they can do to decrease their risk of having a fall. And if they do have a fall, reducing their risk of developing a fracture. And that is going to come down a lot to someone's physical strength and mobility. That's going to be really important for reducing the risk of having a fall in the first place. And then bone mineral density. And if you think about those two things, so strength and bone mineral density, the biggest and the best supported scientific intervention for both of those is resistance training. And, the kind of dose that someone needs to load muscles and load bone tissue enough to develop strength is the ballpark. So let's say for a certain body group, 5 to 10 sets per week. And we're thinking in the rep range. If we're thinking about loading bones, we don't want rep ranges to be too high, Doug, because when rep ranges are too high, you had to lower the weight a lot. And the load is really important when it comes to loading the skeleton. So, rep ranges in that ballpark of, I like kind of 6 to 12 reps, because the 6 to 12 reps providing you, doing an effective set. And what I mean by that is you choose a weight so that when you do 6 to 12 reps, get within 2 reps of failure. An effective set. So if I'm doing squats, select a weight that I think I can do for 6 to 12 reps. And let's say I get to 10, I'm like getting very close to failure. I think I only have 2 reps left. Then that's an effective set. But if I get to 10 and I felt like I could have done another 10 reps, that was not enough of a stimulus for building strength or hypertrophy or bone tissue. So I think that's actually a really important concept for people to think about when they are going and doing resistance training in the gym, what an effective set is. And by definition in the literature, it really is getting within sort of 2 to 3 reps of failure. That means that you're taking that set to the point where you're stressing the body enough, the muscle tissue, ligaments, and the bone, so the body says, hang on, just being exposed to this force, I could be exposed to it again. I need to adapt and grow stronger. That's essentially how we increase our strength, increase bone mineral density, is through these adaptations, which relies on us having the right stimulus in play.
Lately, I've been thinking a lot about toxin exposure, and one thing that I've been paying close attention to is PFAS, or these so-called forever chemicals. They're found in things like non-stick cookware, waterproof clothing, food packaging, and even our drinking water, and they don't break down in the body. Research links them to endocrine disruption, metabolic issues, and perhaps even various types of cancer. I have a scientist coming on the podcast soon to unpack all of this, but in the meantime, I've been using Function Health to test my own PFAS exposure. Function is an all-in-one platform offering over 100 advanced lab tests, including tests you'll be familiar with from this show that we've spoken about, like ApoB and Lp(a), and now PFAS. That is about 5 times more testing than you would get in a standard physical. Most of us have some level of PFAS in our bodies due to the environment that we live in. The question is how much? If levels are high, testing gives you the knowledge to make changes, like filtering your water or switching to PFAS-free products. Function is easy to use with 2,000 plus lab locations across the United States and a membership that's just $499 per year. No supplements, no prescriptions, just real, unbiased health data. Head to functionhealth.com/Simon Hill to get started. That's functionhealth.com/Simon Hill to get started today.